The dust kicked up in spirals around Olivia Greenfield's boots as the townsfolk of Silver Gulch scattered away from her like she carried the plague. Perhaps, in their minds, she did. Whispers followed her through the dry Wyoming streets of 1879, hissing like snakes in the tall grass. Cursed, they said. 5 husbands dead, not a single child to show for it. Olivia kept her chin high, though each word stung worse than the desert sun beating down on her fair skin. She hadn't asked for this life. At 26, she had already buried more men than most undertakers. First James, who died of typhoid just months after their wedding. Then Michael, thrown from his horse while checking fence lines. Samuel followed, shot during a bank robbery he'd simply been witnessing. Nathan had succumbed to pneumonia last winter, and most recently, Edward had drowned crossing the swollen Snake River during the spring floods. Not a single pregnancy had taken root during any marriage, despite her desperate prayers each month. The town doctor had shaken his head last time, speaking in hushed tones about her barren condition, as if it were something contagious. Miss Greenfield, Mrs. Peterson called from the general store porch, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Will you be attending the social this Sunday? Olivia adjusted her market basket. I hadn't planned to, Mrs. Peterson. Perhaps that's for the best, the older woman said, her eyes cold despite her smile. Wouldn't want any of our young men catching your misfortune. Olivia's throat tightened, but she refused to give the woman the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Good day to you, then. She turned and nearly collided with a tall, broad-shouldered man whose weathered face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-bronzed skin, met hers briefly before he tipped his hat. Madam, he said, stepping aside to let her pass. Olivia nodded curtly and hurried on, unaware that those blue eyes followed her until she turned the corner toward her small homestead at the edge of town. Xavier Galloway had ridden into Silver Gulch that morning with little more than his horse, his guns, and the clothes on his back. At 32, he'd spent the better part of his life moving from place to place, following work where he could find it: cattle drives, ranch work, the occasional bounty when times were lean. He'd heard Silver Gulch was looking for a new deputy, and the idea of sleeping in the same bed for more than a week straight had growing appeal. That's Widow Greenfield, said Sheriff Tanner, coming to stand beside Xavier on the boardwalk. Or should I say Widow Blackburn? Or Widow Milner? Hard to keep track these days. Xavier raised an eyebrow. Seems young for so many husbands. 5. Tanner confirmed with a grim nod. Each one dead within a year of saying I do. Folks around here say her womb is cursed, kills any man who tries to plant his seed there. Xavier frowned. Sounds like superstitious nonsense to me. Maybe so, Tanner shrugged. But 5 dead husbands is mighty peculiar, wouldn't you say? Not that it matters, woman, that pretty won't stay single long. Curse or no curse. Xavier watched as Olivia disappeared from view, her copper hair catching the sunlight like a flame. Something about the set of her shoulders, the dignity with which she carried herself despite the vicious whispers, stirred something in him he thought long buried. You said you're looking for a deputy? He asked, turning his attention back to Tanner. That I am. Interested? Xavier nodded. I might be. The small house that Olivia called home had been left to her by her last husband. It sat on a modest plot with a kitchen garden in the back and a view of the mountains to the west. Tonight, as she sat on her porch watching the sun set, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her loneliness. The soft nicker of a horse drew her attention to the road where a rider approached slowly. The last rays of sunlight glinted off the deputy's badge on his chest, and as he drew closer, Olivia recognized the man she'd nearly bumped into earlier that day. Evening, madam, he called, reining his horse to a stop at her gate. Deputy Xavier Galloway. Sheriff asked me to make rounds to the outlying properties. Olivia stood, smoothing her skirts. Everything's fine here, deputy. Though I appreciate the concern. Xavier dismounted, tying his horse to the fence post. Mind if I water my horse? Been riding most of the afternoon. She hesitated only a moment before nodding toward the well. Help yourself. As Xavier drew water for his horse, Olivia found herself studying him. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his skin, but there was something gentle in the way he spoke to his horse, something at odds with the hard lines of his face and the calloused hands that worked the pump. "You're new to Silver Gulch," she observed when he'd finished. "Just rode in this morning." He leaned against the fence. "I've heard a bit about you already, Miss Greenfield." Her spine stiffened. "I'm sure you have. People talk too much in small towns," he said simply. "Most of what they say isn't worth the breath it takes to say it." The comment surprised her, and for the first time in months, Olivia felt the corners of her mouth lift in a genuine smile. That's certainly true in Silver Gulch. They fell into an easy conversation as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. Xavier told her about his years working cattle drives, about the time he'd been caught in a blizzard in Montana Territory and had to shelter in a cave with his horse for 3 days. She found herself laughing at his stories, the sound unfamiliar to her own ears. "I should be going," he said eventually, untying his horse. "Sheriff will be wondering where I got to." "Of course," Olivia said, suddenly self-conscious. What would people say if they knew she'd spent the evening talking with a man on her porch? The rumors would spread like wildfire. As if reading her thoughts, Xavier's expression grew serious. "Miss Greenfield, I don't put much stock in gossip or superstition. If it's all the same to you, I'd like to call on you properly sometime." Olivia felt cold dread wash over her. "Deputy Galloway, you don't understand. The things they say about me, about your womb being cursed." He shook his head. "Like I said, I don't believe in such things." "It doesn't matter if you believe it or not," she said, her voice tightening. 5 husbands, deputy, all dead. That's not gossip, that's fact." Xavier looked at her steadily. "Sounds to me like you've had more than your share of bad luck, not a curse." "You should go," she said, turning toward her door. "And please don't come back." She felt his eyes on her as she stepped inside and closed the door firmly behind her. Only then did she allow the tears to come, hot and bitter. She knew she was protecting him. Any man foolish enough to court her was signing his own death warrant, but the rejection still left her heart aching. Outside, Xavier mounted his horse and rode slowly back to town. The image of Olivia's face, vulnerable and defiant all at once, burned into his mind. Over the next few weeks, Xavier settled into his role as deputy, learning the rhythms of Silver Gulch and its inhabitants. He took his meals at the boarding house run by Mrs. Wilson, an elderly widow whose sharp eyes missed nothing. "I see you've been checking on the Greenfield place more than the other outlying properties," she remarked one evening as she refilled his coffee cup. Xavier met her gaze evenly. "Just doing my job, madam." "That woman's bad luck, deputy. 5 husbands in the ground before their time." Mrs. Wilson lowered her voice. "They say any man who lies with her is doomed." "I've heard," he said dryly. "Seemed to hear it several times a day, in fact." Mrs. Wilson had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Just looking out for you, is all. You seem a decent sort." Xavier had indeed been finding reasons to ride by Olivia's property more often than strictly necessary. Sometimes she would be working in her garden or hanging laundry on the line. He would tip his hat, ask if everything was in order, and move on when she assured him it was. She never invited him to stop, and he respected her wishes, no matter how much he found himself thinking about her when he should have been focusing on other things. One stormy afternoon in late May, Xavier was making his rounds when a flash of lightning spooked his horse. The animal reared, and Xavier, caught off guard, was thrown. He landed hard, his head striking a rock, and the world went black. When he came to, he was lying in an unfamiliar bed, his head throbbing. Rain pounded against the windows, and a fire crackled in a small stove nearby. As his vision cleared, he recognized Olivia moving about the room. "What happened?" he groaned, trying to sit up. She turned quickly. "Don't move. You took a bad fall. I saw it happen from my window and brought you inside." Xavier touched his temple gingerly, finding it bandaged. "How long was I out?" "Almost an hour. I was about to ride for the doctor," Olivia said, approaching with a cup of tea. "Can you drink this? It will help with the pain." He accepted the cup, their fingers brushing briefly, sending an unexpected warmth through him despite his injury. "Thank you." Olivia moved away quickly, as if the contact had burned her. "Your horse is in my lean-to. The storm's too heavy for either of you to leave tonight." Xavier sipped the tea, watching her over the rim of the cup. She seemed jumpy, moving around the small cabin with nervous energy. I'm sorry to impose on you, he said softly. I know you'd rather I wasn't here. Olivia stopped her bustling and looked at him directly. It isn't that, Deputy Galloway. Xavier, he corrected. Seems we're past formalities, considering you've put me in your bed. A blush rose to her cheeks. I couldn't very well leave you in the mud with your head bleeding. I appreciate your help, truly, he said. But I get the feeling my presence makes you uncomfortable. Olivia sighed, sinking into a chair near the bed. You should know that Doc Weber is likely to suggest I'm trying to make you husband number 6 when he finds out you spent the night here. Let him, Xavier said with a shrug that made his head throb. I've never much cared what others think. You should care about this, she insisted. The things they say about the curse. He set the empty cup aside. Olivia, I've seen real curses in my travels. I spent time with the Navajo years back, saw their medicine men work. What's happened to you isn't a curse. It's a string of terrible coincidences. Her eyes glistened in the firelight. You can't know that. I know that living in fear is no way to live at all. His voice was gentle but firm. And I know that you deserve better than to be treated like you're something to be feared. Olivia looked away, blinking rapidly. You don't understand. Every man who's loved me has died. I won't be responsible for another death. Is that why you've been pushing me away? Xavier asked. Because you're afraid I'll die too? She stood abruptly, moving to stir the fire. You should rest. Your head needs time to heal. Xavier wanted to press the issue, but exhaustion was pulling at him, the warm tea and the sound of rain making his eyelids heavy. We'll talk more tomorrow, he murmured as sleep claimed him. When he awoke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the windows. His head felt clearer, though a dull ache remained. Olivia was nowhere to be seen, but the smell of coffee and bacon hung in the air. He sat up carefully, testing his balance before standing. The small cabin was neat and sparsely furnished, a table with 2 chairs, a dresser, the bed he'd slept in, and a rocking chair near the stove. On the wall hung a small painting of a meadow filled with wildflowers. The door opened, and Olivia entered carrying an armful of firewood. She stopped short when she saw him on his feet. You shouldn't be up yet, she scolded, setting down the wood. I've had worse, he assured her. How's my horse? Fed and watered. There's coffee on the stove and bacon keeping warm in the oven if you're hungry. Xavier made his way to the table, noting how Olivia kept her distance, moving around him carefully as if he might shatter or perhaps as if she might. They ate in silence for a while, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Xavier set down his fork. I should thank you properly for taking care of me. Olivia nodded, not meeting his eyes. Anyone would have done the same. Not in this town. They wouldn't, he said quietly. Not for you. Her head jerked up, eyes flashing. I don't need your pity, Deputy. It's not pity I'm offering, Olivia. Then what is it? She demanded. A chance, he said simply. A chance to stop running from shadows. To stop believing you're somehow responsible for the tragedies that have happened to you. Olivia stood, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. You have no right to tell me how to feel about my own life. You're right, Xavier acknowledged. But I've seen what happens when fear takes hold of a person. It's like quicksand. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink. This isn't fear, she insisted. It's caution. It's responsibility. It's loneliness, he said softly. And you don't deserve it. Tears welled in her eyes. You should go. You're well enough to ride. Xavier stood, gathering his hat. I'll go. But this isn't finished, Olivia. Yes, it is, she said firmly, though her voice trembled. Thank you for your concern, Deputy, but I've made my peace with my life. You should do the same. He wanted to argue, wanted to make her see what he saw, a woman of extraordinary strength and beauty, punishing herself for circumstances beyond her control. Instead, he nodded, settled his hat on his head, and left to collect his horse. As he mounted up, he looked back at Olivia standing in her doorway, her arms wrapped around herself as if holding something in or keeping something out. I'll be seeing you, he promised. Word spread quickly through Silver Gulch about the deputy's overnight stay at Widow Greenfield's cabin. Xavier found himself the target of concerned looks and outright warnings. You're playing with fire, boy, Sheriff Tanner told him over cards one evening at the saloon. That woman's had more men in her bed than the Undertaker's had in his parlor. Xavier's expression hardened. Watch your mouth, Sheriff. That's a lady you're talking about. Tanner raised his eyebrows. Touched a nerve, have I? Listen, I've known Olivia since she was a girl. Pretty as a picture, sweet as honey, but trouble follows her like a shadow. I'm just saying, there are other women in this territory. Ones without a trail of dead husbands. I appreciate your concern, Xavier said stiffly, but my personal affairs are my own business. Despite the town's whispers, or perhaps because of them, Xavier continued to find reasons to ride by Olivia's homestead. Sometimes she would be there, sometimes not. When their paths crossed in town, she would acknowledge him with a nod but never stop to talk. It was as if she was determined to keep him at arm's length. June turned to July, bringing scorching heat that shimmered off the plains. The creek that ran through Silver Gulch slowed to a trickle, and tempers ran short as water became precious. It was during this dry spell that a band of cattle rustlers targeted the region, hitting isolated ranches and driving off stock under cover of night. Sheriff Tanner organized a posse to track the rustlers, and Xavier found himself spending long days in the saddle, following cold trails and false leads. It was exhausting, frustrating work, made worse by the relentless sun. Returning late one evening from a fruitless pursuit, Xavier noticed smoke rising from near Olivia's property, too much smoke for a cooking fire. He spurred his tired horse toward her homestead, a knot of dread forming in his stomach. As he crested the ridge, his worst fears were confirmed. Olivia's barn was ablaze, flames leaping high into the twilight sky. He could make out her figure, frantically working the pump to fill buckets. Xavier galloped down the slope, leaping from his horse before it had fully stopped. "Olivia!" he shouted over the roar of the fire. She turned, her face streaked with soot and sweat. "The horses!" she cried. "They're still inside." Without hesitation, Xavier ran toward the burning structure. The heat hit him like a wall as he approached the door, which was partially blocked by a fallen beam. He could hear the terrified whinnies of horses trapped inside. Using his bandana to cover his mouth, Xavier heaved the beam aside enough to slip through. The interior was a hellscape of smoke and flame. 2 horses were tethered in stalls, rearing and pulling at their ropes in panic. A third lay motionless on the ground. Xavier made quick work of the ropes, slapping the horses' rumps to drive them toward the door. They bolted past him into the open air. The barn groaned ominously above him as he checked the fallen horse, finding no signs of life. As he turned to leave, a burning rafter crashed down, striking his shoulder and pinning him momentarily. Pain lanced through him, but adrenaline gave him the strength to shove it aside and stagger toward the exit. He burst out of the barn just as another section of the roof collapsed, gulping clean air as he stumbled away from the inferno. Olivia ran to him, helping him move farther from the danger. "Are you hurt?" she demanded, her eyes wide with fear. "Just some burns," he managed, though his shoulder throbbed where the rafter had hit him. One horse didn't make it. They stood together, watching helplessly as the barn succumbed to the flames. There was nothing to do but let it burn itself out and be grateful it hadn't spread to the house. "How did it start?" Xavier asked when his breathing had steadied. Olivia's expression darkened. "It wasn't an accident. I found this by the back wall before the fire took hold." She held out a broken lantern, its glass chimney smashed. Someone threw it through the window. Xavier's jaw tightened. "The rustlers?" "No," she said, her voice bitter. "This was a message. Cursed woman, leave our town." That's what was painted on my door when I came home this afternoon. Fury rose in Xavier's chest. Who would do such a thing? "Take your pick," Olivia said wearily. "Half the town thinks I'm a witch or worse." Xavier took her hands, which were raw from handling the water buckets. "You're not staying here tonight. Pack what you need. You're coming to town with me." "I can't. This isn't a debate," he cut her off. "Someone just tried to burn you out. They might come back to finish the job." Olivia looked as though she might argue further, but instead, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Give me a few minutes to gather some things." While she packed, Xavier tended to the rescued horses, checking them for injuries and securing them in the small corral beside the house. By the time Olivia emerged with a carpet bag, the barn was nothing but a smoldering ruin against the night sky. Xavier helped her mount his horse, then swung up behind her. The ride to town was silent, Olivia rigid in the saddle before him, her body language clearly communicating her discomfort at their proximity. At the sheriff's office, Tanner listened to their account with a grave expression. Arson's a serious charge, Miss Greenfield. You sure it wasn't just a lantern knocked over? It was deliberate, Xavier insisted before Olivia could respond. And it happened after someone painted threats on her door. Tanner sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. I'll ask around, but folks aren't likely to talk if they know something. You know how it is with the rumors. She needs protection, Xavier said firmly. What do you suggest? I can't spare a man to guard her homestead, not with these rustlers still at large. She'll stay at the boarding house in town for now, Xavier decided. I'll ride out to check her property daily. Olivia, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke up. Don't I get a say in this? Both men turned to look at her. Of course you do, Xavier said, his tone softening. But you can't stay out there alone, not until we know who did this. Mrs. Wilson won't have me at her boarding house, Olivia pointed out. She's made her feelings about me quite clear. She will if I insist, Tanner said with unexpected authority. Law's the law, and no one in my town is going to be driven from their home by threats and fire. Xavier felt a surge of gratitude toward the older man, whose moral compass appeared to be pointing true despite his earlier warnings about Olivia. True to the sheriff's word, Mrs. Wilson grudgingly provided Olivia with a room, though her pinched expression made it clear she considered it a grave imposition. Xavier walked Olivia to the door of the boarding house, aware of curious eyes watching from windows and doorways along the street. Try to get some rest, he told her quietly. I'll check on your property first thing tomorrow. Olivia looked up at him, her green eyes troubled. Why are you doing this, Xavier? Why risk yourself for me? The question caught him off guard, not because he didn't know the answer, but because the answer seemed so obvious to him. Because you deserve someone on your side, Olivia. Everyone does. She studied his face for a long moment. Be careful, she finally said. The curse isn't real, he finished firmly. And even if it was, some things are worth the risk. Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and turned away, feeling her eyes on his back as he walked toward his rented room at the saloon. The next morning, Xavier rode out to Olivia's homestead at first light. The barn was a blackened skeleton against the dawn sky, but the house appeared untouched. He made a thorough check of the property, finding nothing amiss beyond the damage already done. As he was preparing to leave, he noticed fresh hoof prints leading away from the back of the property toward the hills. They didn't match the tracks from his own horse or Olivia's animals. Someone had been here, watching perhaps. Xavier followed the tracks for about a mile before they disappeared on rocky ground. Whoever had left them knew how to cover their trail. It reinforced his suspicion that this wasn't just the work of superstitious townsfolk. Someone with skill and purpose was targeting Olivia. Back in town, Xavier found Olivia at the general store, enduring the whispers and stares of the other customers as she purchased supplies. Your property's secure, he told her quietly as he fell into step beside her. But someone's been watching the place. Found tracks this morning. Olivia's grip tightened on her basket. The same person who started the fire? Possibly. Xavier lowered his voice further. I don't think this is just about the rumors, Olivia. Someone wants you gone badly enough to commit a serious crime. Can you think of anyone who might have a specific grudge against you? She shook her head slowly, then paused. Unless. My last husband, Edward, had a brother. He was convinced I somehow caused the accident at the river, that I'd sent Edward out knowing the waters were high. Where is this brother now? He left town after the funeral. Said he couldn't bear to look at me. Olivia's voice was steady, but Xavier could see the hurt in her eyes. His name is Caleb Blackburn. Xavier nodded. I'll ask Tanner if he's heard anything about Blackburn returning to the area. They parted ways at the boarding house, Xavier promising to check on her later. He found Sheriff Tanner at his desk, going through wanted posters with a furrowed brow. Caleb Blackburn, Xavier said without preamble. What do you know about him? Tanner looked up, surprise evident on his weathered face. Edward's brother? Mean-spirited cuss with a talent for tracking. What? Xavier explained his suspicions, while Tanner listened thoughtfully. Could be, the sheriff conceded. Caleb took Edward's death hard. Blamed Olivia publicly at the funeral, as I recall. But he's been gone almost a year. People hold grudges, Xavier pointed out. And someone with tracking skills has been watching Olivia's property. Tanner sighed. I'll send telegrams to neighboring counties, see if anyone spotted him. In the meantime, keep a close eye on Miss Greenfield. If Blackburn is back and looking for revenge, he won't stop at burning a barn. The next few days passed in a tense holding pattern. Xavier split his time between regular patrols with the rustler problem and checking on Olivia. She remained at the boarding house, though the hostile atmosphere was clearly wearing on her. On the third evening, Xavier invited her to dine with him at the small restaurant attached to the hotel, the only establishment in town that seemed willing to serve her without obvious disdain. As they ate, he noticed how the strain of recent events had left dark circles under her eyes. "You're not sleeping," he observed. Olivia picked at her food. "Would you, in my position? Waiting for the next attack, surrounded by people who think you're cursed or worse." "We'll find who did this," he assured her. And as for the rest, he reached across the table to cover her hand with his "people's opinions change. It just takes time." She looked at their hands, then up at his face. "You really believe that, don't you? That things can change?" "I do." He smiled slightly. "I've seen it happen before. Fear gives way to understanding, given enough time and evidence to the contrary." "And what about you, Xavier?" she asked quietly. "Are you not afraid at all? 5 husbands, all dead within a year. Even the most rational mind would hesitate." Xavier considered her question carefully. "I believe in many things, Olivia. I believe in justice and kindness. I believe in helping those who need it. I don't believe in curses that target innocent women." She withdrew her hand gently. "You still haven't answered my question." "No," he said firmly. "I'm not afraid of some mythical curse. The only thing that frightens me is the thought of good people suffering because of ignorance and superstition." Their conversation was interrupted by the restaurant door banging open. Sheriff Tanner stood there, breathing hard. "Xavier, got a telegram. Caleb Blackburn was spotted in Cheyenne 2 weeks ago, headed this way." Xavier was on his feet immediately. "Any sign of him in the area?" "Nothing concrete, but a rancher reported supplies missing from his line shack up in the foothills." Tanner's gaze shifted to Olivia. "Miss Greenfield, I think it would be best if you stayed in town until we locate Blackburn." Olivia had gone pale. "He really has come back for me, then?" "We don't know that for certain," Xavier said, though he suspected Tanner was right. "But we'll take precautions just the same." That night, Xavier insisted on taking the room across from Olivia's at the boarding house, much to Mrs. Wilson's vocal disapproval. He sat in a chair by the door, his revolver on the small table beside him, listening to the sounds of the house settling around him. Around midnight, a floorboard creaked in the hallway. Xavier was instantly alert, hand moving to his weapon. The doorknob to Olivia's room turned slowly. Xavier was across the hall in 2 strides, his own door flung open. "Stop right there," he commanded. A dark figure froze, then bolted toward the stairs. Xavier gave chase, catching the intruder by the collar just as they reached the landing. The man for it was clearly a man swung around, a knife flashing in the dim light. Xavier jerked back, feeling the blade slice across his chest. It was a shallow cut, but enough to make him loosen his grip momentarily. The intruder broke free, stumbling down the stairs and out the front door before Xavier could recover. By now, the commotion had awakened the house. Olivia emerged from her room, a shawl clutched around her nightgown. "Xavier, you're bleeding." He pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the warm wetness seeping through his shirt. "It's nothing, just a scratch. Did you see his face?" She shook her head, her face ashen in the lamplight now being held aloft by a disheveled Mrs. Wilson. "What is the meaning of this?" the landlady demanded. "Fighting in my establishment in the middle of the night." "Someone tried to enter Miss Greenfield's room," Xavier explained tersely. "I suggest you check your locks, Mrs. Wilson, and perhaps reconsider who you allow to walk in off the street." The older woman's indignation faltered. "You mean someone broke in? A stranger? Or someone who knew exactly which room to target?" Xavier said grimly. By morning, word had spread through Silver Gulch about the break-in. The town's attitude toward Olivia seemed to shift subtly from outright hostility to wary concern. It was one thing to whisper about curses. It was another to ignore a flesh and blood threat in their midst. Sheriff Tanner organized a search party to comb the foothills for any sign of Blackburn, leaving Xavier to guard Olivia. They moved temporarily into a room at the hotel, which offered better security than the boarding house. "This can't go on indefinitely," Olivia said as they sat by the window, watching the street below. "I can't hide forever, and you can't spend your life guarding me. Xavier, his chest bandaged beneath his shirt, turned to look at her. What are you suggesting? I should leave Silver Gulch, she said, her voice steady though her hands trembled slightly. Start fresh somewhere else, where no one knows about the curse about my past. Running won't solve this, Olivia. Blackburn will just follow you. Xavier moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. And even if he didn't, what kind of life would that be? Always looking over your shoulder, always afraid the rumors might catch up to you. Tears welled in her eyes. What choice do I have? Stay here, where everyone hates me? Where I'm a danger to anyone who comes close to me? You're not a danger, he said fiercely. And not everyone hates you. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding that had been building since that first encounter on the street months ago. Xavier, she whispered, I can't bear the thought of something happening to you because of me. Nothing is going to happen to me, he promised. He leaned forward, and their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and urgent. Olivia's hands moved to his face, tracing the line of his jaw as if memorizing it. When they finally broke apart, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I've wanted to do that since the first time I saw you, Xavier admitted. A small smile curved her lips. Even knowing what you knew about me. Especially knowing what I knew about you, he said. Your strength, your dignity in the face of cruelty, those things drew me to you, Olivia. A commotion in the street below drew their attention. Sheriff Tanner and several men were riding into town. A bound figure slumped over one of the horses. They found him, Xavier said, rising quickly. Stay here, lock the door behind me. He hurried downstairs and into the street, where a crowd was gathering around the returning search party. The prisoner was being hauled roughly from the horse, a lean man with a week's growth of beard and wild, angry eyes. Caleb Blackburn, Tanner announced, gripping the man's arm. Caught him up at Miller's old line shack with enough supplies to last a month, and this he held up a small bottle. Kerosene, same as was used to start the fire at Miss Greenfield's barn. Xavier stepped forward, studying the man who had caused so much fear. Blackburn glared back, his hatred palpable. She killed my brother, Blackburn spat. Sent him across that river knowing he'd drown. She's a witch, I tell you. Your brother's death was an accident, Xavier said evenly, as were the deaths of her other husbands. There is no curse, Blackburn, just a woman who's suffered more loss than most could bear. You're a fool if you believe that, Blackburn snarled. She'll be your death too, mark my words. Tanner jerked the man toward the jailhouse. That's enough out of you. You'll hang for arson and attempted murder, Blackburn. As they hauled him away, Xavier noticed that many in the crowd were watching with thoughtful expressions. The confrontation with a flesh and blood villain seemed to have shaken some of their supernatural fears. Xavier returned to the hotel to find Olivia waiting anxiously. He told her what had happened, watching relief wash over her features. It's over, then, she said softly. The immediate danger, yes. Xavier took her hands. But the real healing for you and for this town is just beginning. In the days that followed, Caleb Blackburn was tried and sentenced to prison for his crimes. Without the threat hanging over her, Olivia returned to her homestead, where Xavier helped her begin rebuilding the barn. To their surprise, several townsfolk came to assist with the raising, first Sheriff Tanner and the blacksmith, then others, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. It seemed the revelation of Blackburn's vendetta had created cracks in the wall of superstition surrounding Olivia. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset gild the new barn, Xavier took Olivia's hand. I've been thinking, he said carefully, about us, about the future. She looked at him, her expression guarded. Xavier, the things people say about me are changing, he interrupted gently. But even if they weren't, it wouldn't matter to me. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ring, simple but elegant, a single pearl set in silver. I love you, Olivia. I want to spend my life with you, if you'll have me. She stared at the ring, then at him, her eyes wide. You can't mean it. After everything, I mean it with all my heart. Xavier took a deep breath. They said your womb was cursed, but I say, if that curse gave me you, then I'll thank God for it every day of my life. Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks. You really aren't afraid? The only thing I fear is a life without you in it, he said simply. She reached for him then, her kiss answering his question before her words could. Yes, she whispered against his lips. Yes, I'll marry you. They were wed that autumn in a small ceremony attended by a handful of townsfolk, including Sheriff Tanner, who stood as Xavier's best man. Mrs. Wilson surprised everyone by bringing a wedding cake, a peace offering that Olivia accepted with gracious thanks. Winter came, blanketing Silver Gulch in snow. Xavier and Olivia settled into the rhythm of married life, finding joy in simple moments, reading by the fire, breaking trails through fresh snow, planning spring plantings for the garden. When spring arrived, bringing wildflowers and birdsong, Olivia discovered she was with child. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. What if, she began one night as they lay in bed. Xavier placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. No what ifs, he said firmly. Just us, just now, just love. 9 months later, as the first snow of the following winter dusted the ground, Olivia gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Hope, for all that she represented to them both. As Xavier held his daughter for the first time, he looked at Olivia, exhausted but radiant in the lamplight. Still believe in the curse? He asked softly. Olivia smiled, reaching out to touch his face. No, I believe in you. In us. In new beginnings. Xavier leaned down to kiss her, their daughter nestled between them. Then that's all the blessing we'll ever need. In the years that followed, Olivia and Xavier welcomed 2 more children, a boy they named James, after her first husband, and another girl they called Faith. The whispers about curses faded into distant memory as new stories took their place, stories of the deputy who saw beyond superstition to the heart of a woman worth fighting for. And if sometimes, late at night, Olivia still woke in a cold sweat, reaching to make sure Xavier was still breathing beside her, he would pull her close and whisper the words that had become their promise. I'm here, love. And I'm not going anywhere.